one at Dongban University knew exactly when the third floor of the old library had been abandoned. People only knew that after a small fire more than 10 years ago. The administration had completely sealed that section off. The long wooden tables, the tall bookshelves reaching almost to the ceiling, the cloudy glass windows coated in dust, and even the old wall clock had all been left there like the corpse of a forgotten past. For a while, students whispered that a librarian had once hanged herself in the storage room there after losing her mind. But no one ever verified it. Rumors in an old university grew as easily as moss on the walls. The more forbidden something was, the more it spread. What made the third floor frightening was not simply that it was old. Not because it was dark. And not because of the smell of damp paper mixed with rotting wood that always rose there like the breath of something decaying in the shadows. But because there were too many stories surrounding a book that did not exist in the library records. Some said it was an ancient book. Some said it was bound in human skin. Some swore they had seen the cover completely smooth, black as the surface of water at midnight. But every time they came back, its shape had changed a little, as if the book did not remain still but was silently adapting to the one who was about to open it. People called it by only one name: the book that should never be read at midnight. At first, Min laughed at those stories the way one laughed at absurd tales passed down from older students to younger ones. He was a final-year literature student, working on a thesis about the relationship between primal fear and taboo symbols in folktales. In other words, he lived by dissecting other people's fears. Every urban legend, to him, could be broken down into collective psychology, suggestion, false memory, or simply a stupid prank embroidered into something more entertaining. He had never believed in ghosts. He believed in the mind slipping out of balance, in darkness magnifying imagination, in silence making people hear sounds that did not exist. Until that night. A drizzly early winter night, cold and damp, with the campus almost deserted because most students had returned to the dorms or gone out. Min stayed in the library until nearly midnight to revise the final chapter of his thesis. Close to 11:30, the electrical system flickered a few times, and 2 hallway lights downstairs went out. The librarian on the night shift complained of being tired and told Min that when he left, he should lock the side door because she still had to go down to the security office to sign some papers. Before leaving, she looked at him for a long time, as though she wanted to say something, then only let out one unfinished sentence. "If you hear someone calling from the 3rd floor, don't answer." Min laughed, thinking she was joking, but she did not laugh back. In her old, sleepless eyes there was something that looked very much like real fear. Min watched her figure disappear down the stairs and shook his head. He hated that kind of clumsy joke. It sank into the subconscious first, making the person invent fear for themselves. 11:47. The rain outside began to fall harder, tapping against the window glass in a steady rhythm. The library was so empty that Min could clearly hear the scratch of his pen on paper and even the sound of his own breathing. After a while, from the far end of the hallway near the staircase leading up to the 3rd floor came the faint sound of something being dragged. Not once, but twice in succession, as if someone were lifting something heavy and setting it down on the old wooden floor. Min looked up. Silence. He was about to lower his head and continue working when he heard it again. Creak. The sound was very thin, but long, exactly like the sound of a door opening in a room where the hinges had not moved in years. Min set his pen down. Even if he did not believe in ghosts, he still thought it was possible that someone had slipped up there. The library had no shortage of students who liked to test their courage or sneak onto the forbidden floor to take pictures. He took out his phone, switched on the flashlight, stepped away from his desk, and walked toward the stairs. The closer he came, the more strongly he smelled dampness. Not only the smell of old books. It was thicker, colder, touched with the sourness of wet earth mixed with a faint metallic stench. Like cloth wrapped for too long around a corpse. The third floor lay behind an old iron door that was normally always secured with a large padlock. But that night, the door stood slightly open. Just enough for one person to slip through. Min stopped. He remembered very clearly that before, he had seen the padlock still hanging there. "Is anyone up there?" he called. No one answered. He pushed the door open. The hinges shrieked like the throat of an old person groaning on the verge of death. The space inside was darker than he expected. The light from the hallway below only reached a short distance before dying away, giving way to a bluish-gray darkness spreading over the bookshelves. The cloudy windows were streaked with rainwater, and outside them the shadows of trees swayed like long arms scratching at the glass. The wall clock in the corner of the room seemed to still be running. But the second hand did not move. It only made a ticking sound, tick, 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 even though the hand was frozen exactly at 12. Min swept the flashlight around the room. Bookshelves draped in white cloth, some of the covers rotten and torn, revealing faded spines beneath, reading tables set askew, a chair tipped over, a rusted ceiling fan, no one there. Then Min saw it. At the end of the room, on the wooden shelf pressed against the northern wall, in the middle of a patch of darkness so dense it seemed the night itself had gathered more thickly there, lay a single book. It was not covered in dust like the others. It was not wrapped in protective plastic. It bore no library label. The cover was black, smooth, swallowing light so completely that even the flashlight did not reflect off it in the slightest. It looked less like a real object than like a piece of night made solid. Min stared for a few seconds. Part of him wanted to turn away, simply because the scene had been arranged too perfectly, too theatrically, as though someone knew exactly what human beings were afraid of and had deliberately placed each thing in position. But that was also what awakened his innate curiosity. He stepped closer and reached out. The moment his fingers touched the cover, Min jerked his hand back. Cold. Not cold the way a book felt in an air-conditioned room. It was a wet, deep, living cold, like touching the skin of an animal that had been dead for hours and had not yet lost the chill of the corpse. He clenched his jaw, grabbed the book firmly, and pulled it from the shelf. At that very instant, the beam of his phone flashlight trembled violently and dimmed. The wall clock, which had been motionless, suddenly struck once with a dull dong. The sound was louder than it should have been, echoing back and forth through the room like something ringing inside a deep well. The screen of his phone read 23:59. Min carried the book to a table near the window. He laughed to himself. trying to drive away the strange feeling crawling under his skin. Just adrenaline, just the right moment, right as the clock hit midnight, making him tense. He sat down, placed the book on the table, and wiped away the layer of moisture clinging to the cover. There was no writing, no title, no ornament. Only, in the center of the cover, a faint indentation like the imprint of a hand pressed from the other side of the leather. Min touched it. Thump. The sensation was unmistakable. The surface was not flat. In that hollow spot were 5 shallow grooves, perfectly matching the shape of finger bones. And when he placed his own hand there, something underneath shifted, very slightly, as if another hand from inside were pressing back against his. Min snatched his hand away. The clock on his phone changed to 000. In that instant, every sound vanished. No more rain. No more wind against the windows. No more ticking of the clock. The silence came down so abruptly that Min's ears rang. He could hear the pounding of his own heart inside his chest. His lips went dry. Without thinking, Min looked around as though he had just stepped into another space entirely. Then the book opened by itself. Not with the abrupt force of pages blown open by wind. The cover slowly lifted, little by little, so gently that it made no sound at all. As though invisible hands, infinitely patient, were opening it before him. The first pages were blank, yellowed as though smoke-stained. Min swallowed and leaned in closer. The first page was completely blank. The second page was blank. The third page was blank too. But just as he was about to turn the next page, a black stain appeared in the middle of the paper, like ink soaking upward from the back. Curving strokes gradually formed, slowly joining into a line of text. At last, you have found me. Min shot to his feet, knocking the chair over. A chill ran down his spine. At first he thought someone had used some kind of invisible ink prank. But the writing did not look like ink. It looked like tiny black threads moving beneath the paper fibers and pushing upward into words. Each letter appearing with a faint trembling as if it were alive. Min looked around. Who's here? His voice had gone hoarse. No one answered. The book lay still. Min inhaled deeply, reminding himself to stay calm. There are no ghosts. There are no ghosts. That was the only thing he was lucid enough to cling to. He reached out and turned the page. This time the line was already there. Do not turn around. Min's hand froze. Behind him stretched the entire dim room with its shelves layered in shadow. The sentence was so direct that gooseflesh rose on his neck. He let out a forced laugh, trying to prove to himself that he was not being manipulated like a child. He turned sharply to look behind him. There was nothing there except the white cloths draped over the bookshelves. Utterly motionless. When Min turned back, the words on the page had disappeared. A different line was slowly forming. I told you not to turn around. His throat tightened. On the surface of the paper, the letters looked as though they had been written in something darker than darkness. He braced a hand against the edge of the table to keep himself from shaking. His heart beat so fast his chest hurt. A footstep sounded behind him. Clack. Slow. Heavy. Very close. This time Min did not turn around. His body froze as though nailed to the chair. Every cell in the skin of his back was warning him that something was standing there. Truly there, only an arm's length away. Clack. Another step. Min's hands tightened until his knuckles whitened. The book turned to a new page on its own. It is standing behind you. A stream of cold breath touched the back of his neck. Not imagination, not a draft. That cold had rhythm, had moisture, had the faint stench of water that had stagnated too long in darkness. Min's scalp went numb. He could almost feel something lowering its head toward his neck. Immensely patient, immensely gentle, like an animal sniffing at its prey. The book continued to form letters. If you turn around, you will see it. The line beneath appeared more slowly. If you do not turn around, it will touch you. Min's breath caught. Immediately after that, something brushed through his hair. Soft, cold, wet, like long fingers stroking from the crown of his head down behind his ear. Min screamed and spun around. No one was there. The space behind him held only an empty chair, the narrow aisle between the bookshelves, and the deep shadow at the end of the row. But on the surface of the nearby table, 5 long wet streaks had just appeared, as though someone had laid a hand there. Water dripped from those marks onto the floor. Beneath the table, a dark puddle was spreading, thick and lightless. Min staggered backward, tripping over the chair and falling hard. He tried to crawl away, but his hand touched something slick and cold on the floor. When he looked, beneath the weak flashlight beam, a layer of blackish fluid coated his palm, sticky like congealed blood gone rotten. He gagged. When Min looked back toward the table, the book had turned to another page. You looked at it. The next page changed immediately. Now it has looked at you as well. Min grabbed his phone and tried to run for the door, but the path leading back to the stairwell no longer looked the way it had before. The distance seemed to stretch out, darker than before, and the shelves on either side no longer stood straight but warped inward, making the aisle look like the throat of some creature opening to swallow him whole. The sheets draped over the shelves stirred faintly despite the total lack of wind, as though something underneath them were breathing. Min ran. The sound of his footsteps pounded across the old wooden floor, but after only a few strides, he realized the wall clock at the far end of the room was still in front of him. No farther away and no closer. The path had stretched into infinity. He turned back, and the table with the book was still behind him at precisely the same distance, as though he had not moved at all. The space on the 3rd floor had been bent according to a law that did not belong to physics. The ticking of the clock suddenly returned, this time much louder, as though the second hand were striking directly against his temples. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound came with the flashlight growing a little dimmer. Min tried to scream, but his throat seemed sealed shut. He ran toward another shelf, grabbed a random book, and hurled it into the aisle. It landed with a thud, but the moment it hit the floor it shrank inward like a wet scrap of skin, its cover parting to reveal pages shredded to pieces. On every page the same sentence was written over and over in a trembling hand on the verge of madness. Do not read it at midnight. Do not read it at midnight. Do not read it at midnight. Min froze. A row of other books on the shelf trembled slightly. Their spines scraped against the wood with a rustling sound like countless insects writhing. One by one, they began to slide off the edge. Some had covers torn open like flayed skin. Some had swollen spines as if waterlogged. Some had no paper inside at all. Only masses of black hair pressed flat, wet and foul-smelling. Min backed away, his breathing broken. From the end of the shelf, in the deepest patch of darkness, came the sound of someone turning pages. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Very even, very slow. Each turn sounded like dry paper rubbing together like skin being peeled. Min turned the flashlight toward the sound. The trembling beam passed over the edge of a shelf. Faded book covers, draped cloths, and then stopped on the figure of someone sitting at the last reading table in the room. The figure had its back to Min, tall and gaunt, with long wet hair covering its back. In front of it lay an open black book. Every time its pale hand turned a page, water dripped from its hair and fingers onto the table. Beneath its feet was a vast pool of black water. Min stood rigid. Who are you?" he asked, his voice cracking. The figure did not answer. It slowly tilted its head to the right at an impossibly deep angle, as though its neck no longer had bones to support it. The hair slipped aside, revealing the back of a bruised purple neck crisscrossed with gouges from fingernails. Then it spoke, without turning around. "I have waited a very long time for someone to continue reading." That was not the voice of an ordinary human being. It sounded like 2 or 3 voices layered over each other. A hoarse male voice, a woman whispering, and a smaller sound beneath them, like a child choking on water. Min turned and ran. This time he threw himself straight into a wooden door leading to the storage room beside the main hall. The door flew open and he stumbled inside. The storage room was small, cramped, and darker, the stench of damp decay even stronger. His flashlight swept across piles of rotting files, ropes, broken picture frames, and old cardboard boxes. Min slammed the door shut and jammed a wooden bar through the handle. His heart hammered like it would burst through his ribs. Outside, the sound of page turning stopped at once. In its place came the dragging footsteps. Clack, drag, clack, drag. They stopped right outside the door. Min covered his mouth so as not to breathe too loudly. A knock sounded. Talk. Then 2 more. Slow, clear, and heavy. Talk, talk. After that came fingernails scratching across the wood. Screech. The sharp sound sliced straight through his eardrums, making his teeth ache. Splinters fell from the door. He backed deeper into the room until his spine hit a filing cabinet. At that moment, the flashlight beam accidentally swept across the opposite wall, and Min saw lines of writing covering it from floor to ceiling. At first he thought it was mold. But it was not. It was handwriting. Thousands of sentences layered over one another in charcoal, ink, and something dark brown that had long since dried. "Don't open it. It is not a book. It reads back the one WHO opens it. When midnight passes, do not trust what you see. If it asks your name, do not answer. If it speaks of your memories, do not believe it. If it uses the voice of a loved one, cover your ears." In the center of the wall was another line, larger than the rest. written as though the one who had written it had gone mad with terror. It does not create horror stories. It pulls them out of you. Min felt the room's temperature plunge so quickly that his breath turned white. The scratching outside the door stopped. That silence was even more terrifying. Then a voice spoke right beside his ear. "Min." He spun around, but behind him there was only the rotting filing cabinet. The voice came again, this time from under the desk in the left corner. "Min, open the door." It was his mother's voice. There was no mistaking it. That soft voice, slightly rough at the ends of its phrases. That slow and gentle cadence, he had known it all his life. For an instant, his mind went blank. His mother had died 3 years ago in a traffic accident. Min himself had gone into the morgue to identify the body. He had seen her face crushed on one side. Had seen the hands that once stroked his hair now purple with cold. "My son, open the door for me. It's so dark out here." Tears suddenly rose and stung his eyes. Some deep part of him, the weakest part, the part that still throbbed with a wound that had never healed, wanted to rush forward and open the door immediately. But on the wall was a line that caught his eye like both a warning and a rescue. "If it uses the voice of a loved one, cover your ears." Shaking, Min retreated farther back, pressing both hands hard over his ears. Instantly the voice outside changed. From his mother's gentle tone, it stretched into a soft laugh, then warped into multiple overlapping sounds, until at last it became an angry hiss. The door began to shake violently. Bang! 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 The wooden bar jammed through the handle snapped loose. The door flew open. No one stood there. Only the dark aisle. The old table with the open book laid in the center of the room. As if it had never moved from that spot at all. But on the table there was one new thing, an old photograph. Min stepped out slowly, never taking his eyes off the book. The photo was a family picture taken when he was in 9th grade. His father stood on the right, his mother on the left, and he sat between them. That photograph had been kept in a drawer in his house. It could not possibly be here. Min picked it up. The corner of the photo was soaking wet, reeking faintly of rot as if it had just been dredged up from a sewer. In the picture, all three faces at first looked normal. But right before Min's eyes, his mother's mouth in the photograph slowly lengthened, her lips splitting back to her ears to reveal 2 rows of tightly packed black teeth like the teeth of a fish. Her eyes filled with black ink. His father's face slowly tilted toward him, his neck stretching unnaturally long. And Min himself in the photo suddenly vanished, leaving only a blank patch of darkness in the middle between the two of them. The photograph slipped from his hand. The book turned to a new page. "I know whom you miss the most." The next page. "I know what you fear the most." And another page after that. "I know that every night you dream of her calling your name from beneath the water." A terrible cold seized Min in the stomach. He had never told anyone about that nightmare. For all 3 years after his mother died, there had been nights when he dreamed of her standing in the road, clothes drenched as if she had just stepped out of some black river, calling his name with a voice both loving and accusing. He would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding wildly, and had never dared tell anyone. Min kept backing away. "What the hell is happening?" The book formed more words as though replying. I do not read text. I read people. A small sound came from beneath the table. Talk. Then another. Talk, talk. Min slowly lowered his gaze. Under the table, in the darkness, there was a hand. It did not come all the way out, only rested palm down against the floor. The fingers long and white, the nails bruised black and the fingertips water swollen. That hand slowly crept forward a little. Then another hand appeared beside it. Then one more from under the chair opposite. Then more hands from the darkness under the shelves, under the tables, beneath the edges of cabinets, crawling silently outward, slowly clutching at the wooden floor like countless human spiders waiting for prey. Min screamed and ran for the door. This time he really reached the staircase. The iron door stood wide open. He threw himself down the stairs, slipping a few steps because his legs were shaking. The hallway on the second floor was completely dark even though the lights should still have been on. He ran like mad, not daring to look back. As he neared the librarian's desk, he saw someone sitting there with their back turned. "Miss," Min shouted. "Miss, up there's." The person at the desk slowly turned around. It was the night shift librarian. Or at least it looked like her. Her gray hair hung soaked against her face. Her eye sockets were deep and filled with black water. Around her neck was a circular bruise like the mark of a rope. She smiled, and the smile split all the way to her ears. "So, you opened it already?" she asked. Min stumbled backward. Looking down, he saw that her feet were not touching the ground. Her whole body was floating a few centimeters above the chair, swaying very gently. Min turned to run for the main door, but every window in the library slammed shut at once. Glass rattled violently. The ceiling lights flickered on and off. Darkness and light flashed in rapid alternation, making everything jerk like broken frames of film. Every time the lights went out, Min felt something move closer. When the lights came back, the librarian's desk was empty. When the lights went out again, whispers came from everywhere, from the shelves, the ceiling, the cracks in the walls. "Read. Keep reading. Once it's opened, it has to be finished. Don't stop halfway." Min clutched his head and ran for the main door. The moment his hand touched the handle, behind him came the sound of rushing footsteps. Not one person, many, running, dragging, clattering, slapping, as if an entire crowd of barefoot, soaking wet bodies were pouring down the staircase. He turned around. From the direction of the third-floor hallway, figures began to appear. Some wore rotted clothes, their heads slumped to one side as if their necks were broken. Some crawled on all fours, their hair covering their faces. Some had only their upper bodies left, dragging their own entrails down the stairs while laughing in thin, delighted voices. Some faces, at a glance, looked like the old ID photos of university students. Some wore librarian tags. One was a child in a primary school uniform with a black hole through its chest. All of them were wet, pale, carrying the same blank stare as though their souls had long since been extracted. And among them, descending slowly, was the faceless shadow Min had glimpsed earlier. It was taller than all the rest, slender, its surface dark as if pieced together from the house's own shadows. Where a face should have been, there was only a sunken region of darkness. As it approached, the sound of pages turning rippled around it, as though the entire library were opening at once. Min yanked the door. Locked. He pounded against the glass. No one heard. His phone had no signal. The battery was down to 3%. The book had somehow appeared on the floor right beside his feet. Open. No one leaves before the story is finished. Min kicked it away. It flipped a few times across the floor. Then stopped, still open to the same page. The crowd of dripping dead moved closer. The smell of damp rot, mud, sewer water, and death swelled thick enough to choke. Min suddenly remembered the wall in the storage room. Remembered the line, "It does not create horror stories. It pulls them out of you." That meant the thing lived off fear, memory, guilt, pain from the one who opened it. It did not only frighten. It dug through a person, dragged things out, clothed them in shape, made them stand outside. If that was true, then the more afraid he became, the stronger it grew. But how could he not be afraid? The dead things were almost upon him. In the middle of his panic, a fragment of memory flashed in his mind. When he had been a child, his mother had once said that some forbidden objects were hidden not because they were dangerous to touch, but because they were strongest when people accepted their rules. She had once told him, "Evil likes to make rules. The more you obey, the deeper it pulls you in." Min did not know why he remembered that now, but it drove into his mind like a nail. The book had made rules. Do not turn around. Do not answer. Keep reading. Do not stop. They were all its rules. What if he refused to play? Min looked at the book. A mad thought struck him. If it was only strong while the reader obeyed, then he had to break the act of reading. Not look at the words. Not continue the story. Not let it lead him. Just as the faceless shadow came within a few steps of him, Min bent down, snatched up the book, and squeezed his eyes shut. He did not read. He tore. The first page ripped under his hands. The entire library roared. Not wind, not voices, but the sound of thousands of screams layered over one another. Pained, furious, horrified, erupting from every corner of the walls. The dripping figures jerked as though yanked taut by invisible strings. The faceless shadow recoiled half a step, and the dark hollow where its head should have been twisted violently like a pit into which a stone had just been thrown. Min tore another page. Blood. From the middle of the book's spine, a black-red liquid burst out. Hot and reeking, the letters on the pages no longer lay still but writhed like worms cut in half. They crawled up Min's hands, slipping beneath his fingernails, burning like acid. He clenched his teeth and tore again. The dripping dead all howled at once. The windows shook violently. One hallway bulb exploded. Glass shards flew everywhere. The book flew open to its middle. At this point it no longer seemed to contain paper pages at all, but thin layers of clinging skin stacked over one another. In each layer, tiny veins could be seen, and words rose across them as though carved from the inside outward. Min forced himself not to look directly at the writing. He only kept tearing. Every time he ripped a sheet, visions crashed into his mind. A woman hanging herself in the storage room. A student using a box cutter to slash open his own wrists in the reading hall. A child face down in a basin of black water until it drowned. An old man clutching the book and clawing out his own eyes because the thing in the book is looking back. These were the people who had opened it before. The stories it had swallowed. Min was shaking so hard his hands had gone numb. But he kept tearing. Suddenly an icy hand clamped around his wrist. The faceless shadow had come right up to him without his noticing. From the sunken darkness where its face should have been, countless whispers poured out. Do not destroy the story. Do not do this. You will have to read the ending with your own body. Its hand tightened. Min's skin burned with pain as if sliced by ice. He looked up, and in that instant the darkness where its face should have been widened into a deep hollow. Inside was not emptiness, but countless eyes packed together. Hundreds, thousands of human eyes, children's eyes, old eyes, eyes swollen from drowning, eyes rolled white from hanging, all staring at him. Min screamed and with all his strength smashed the book's cover against the edge of the nearby table. Crack! Something inside broke. The whispers cut off at once. A freezing gust swept through the library. The dripping figures reeled. The clock on the wall began spinning madly. The second hand whirling out of control. The book convulsed in Min's hands like a dying animal. He smashed it again. Crack! The spine split apart. From the gap between the two covers came a scream unlike anything human. High, sharp, and piercing enough that the blood in Min's ears felt as though it would burst outward. Every window in the library shattered simultaneously. Rain and wind rushed in. The wet figures dissolved in strips like smoke being torn apart. The faceless shadow shrank inward. The darkness of its face curling up like the mouth of a pit being sealed shut. Min collapsed. He did not know how long later he opened his eyes. Morning had come. Weak sunlight shone through the grimy windows. The rain had stopped. Min was lying on the floor of the second floor of the library, surrounded by books and papers scattered everywhere. Shattered glass, tables and chairs shoved out of place. The main door stood half open. Voices drifted faintly in from outside. Everything looked as though it had just passed through a severe storm. But there were no drowned dead. No dark shadow. No hands beneath the tables. Only the book. It lay right in front of him. Whole. Unbroken. Not a single tear. The black cover was still smooth. Cold. Flawless. As if it had never been ripped at all. Min sat up abruptly and scrambled away from it. His wrist still bore the purple mark of fingers gripping him. Beneath his nails clung a dark stain that would not wash away. This had not been a dream. Footsteps hurried toward him. The morning shift librarian and a security guard appeared at the doorway. Their faces paling at the wrecked scene. They bombarded him with questions about what had happened. Min stammered that someone had broken in. Maybe a thief. There was something on the third floor. But when the guard and several others went up to check, the third floor was locked shut just as before. The rusted padlock was still there, untouched, covered in a faint layer of dust without any fingerprints. They looked at Min like he was someone who had suffered a severe shock. No one believed him. The library cameras had also malfunctioned that night. The footage from 11:58 to 12:16 was only a strip of gray static flickering on the screen. After that the camera resumed. showing Min unconscious on the floor of the second floor. No one saw the book in the footage, even though when the staff reached him it had been lying right beside him. Min abandoned his thesis. He went home and burned with fever for 2 days. In delirium, he heard pages turning at the foot of his bed, heard wet footsteps in the hallway, heard his mother calling his name from the living room. Every time he forced his eyes open, the room was empty, but on the floor there was always a small black wet streak leading from the door to the edge of the bed before vanishing. On the third night, Min woke at exactly 0000 because he felt that someone was sitting at the end of his bed. In the darkness, he could not see a person, only an area blacker than the rest of the room and the faint rustle of paper. The next day, Min went back to the library. Not because he was brave, but because he understood that it was not over. That thing was not in the third floor. The third floor had only been where it lodged. Once someone opened the book, it clung to them like mold spores settling in the lungs. He needed to know what it was, where it came from, and how to stop it for real. Otherwise he would spend the rest of his life half awake and half mad, never knowing what was his own memory and what had been grown by it to devour him little by little. He slipped into the library records room late that afternoon. After digging through stacks of old registers, Min found faded reports from more than 10 years earlier. There had indeed been a death in the third-floor storage room. The victim was Nguyen Lê Kien, the librarian in charge of the Rare Books Archive. The report listed the cause of death as suicide by hanging. A note at the bottom, signed by the principal, read, "Seal the area. Remove all materials related to the matter." It did not specify what those related materials were, but another record clipped together with it stated that before she died, Ms. Kien had shown abnormal behavior, insomnia, panic, and repeated claims that the book is writing me into itself. A few days before her death, she had requested a transfer and whispered to a colleague that every night at midnight the book opened by itself and read the names of people who had never even touched it. Min felt cold to the bone. He followed up on Ms. Kien's name and asked an elderly cleaning woman who had worked at the university for many years. At first she did not want to talk, but when Min told her he had gone up to the third floor, her face turned completely pale. She said that year there had not been only one death. A few months before Ms. Kien, a male student had locked himself inside the storage room and stabbed through both his own ears with a pair of scissors. They had found him sitting beside the black book, hands covered in writing, having scrawled across the walls that "it won't stop telling the ending." That case, too, had been hushed up to protect the university's reputation. They say the book didn't belong to the school. The cleaning woman whispered. It was among a pile of donated books from an old mansion that was torn down by the riverside. That house had belonged to a man who copied manuscripts for hire. He lived alone and was known for being strange, always hand-copying old scriptures for people. Later they found him dead in the cellar, still holding a pen, surrounded by papers filled with the names of dead villagers. After that, anyone who entered that house said they heard pages turning at midnight. A deep chill drove straight into Min's bones. The book was perhaps not simply a cursed object. It might have been created to preserve something far worse: the memories of the dead, the names of the dead, or perhaps the darkest part of the living themselves. That night Min did not go home. He stayed in his rented room, preparing the only things he thought might help. Every light turned on, every mirror covered, the digital clock screen hidden, and a voice recorder set to run continuously. He sat at his desk, waiting for midnight. He knew it would come, not by leaping out of the shadows in some monstrous form, but by demanding that he finish reading it. 11:59. The room slowly began to grow colder. The curtains moved slightly even though the windows were shut. The recorder emitted a faint hiss, as though picking up another frequency. 000. From inside the desk drawer came a rustling sound. Min did not open it, but the sound continued. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Then the drawer slid open on its own. The black book lay inside. Min did not remember bringing it home. Or perhaps it had brought itself. The cover slowly opened. Min stood frozen, his whole body shaking, but he forced himself not to look down at the words. The recorder kept running. He reached for his phone, turned on the speaker, and blasted some random music as loudly as possible to drown everything out. But it did not help. In his head he still heard the whispering from the pages. The ending is waiting. You only need to finish it. You only need to look here. Grinding his teeth, Min pulled a lighter from his pocket. He had thought about this all day. If tearing did not work, then maybe burning it would, even if it seemed too simple to be the answer. He had to try. He flicked the lighter. The flame trembled with a pale blue edge. Min pressed it to the corner of the cover. The fire caught immediately. But instead of paper burning, the flame spread as though it had caught living flesh. The smell was not the smell of scorched paper, but of burning meat and hair, so strong it made Min gag. The book convulsed violently on the desk. From inside it came the shrieks of many voices at once. The flame flared up high and then abruptly went out, leaving on the cover a line of bright red words like glowing coals. Too late. The lights in the room went out. In the darkness came the sound of water dripping onto the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Then the sound of someone walking barefoot around the room. Wet, slow, patient. Min held the lighter in his shaking hand and flicked it again. The tiny flame was just enough for him to see black wet footprints on the floor circling the chair where he sat. Every print was long and warped, like the feet of a person who had soaked in water too long. The flame died. A hand settled on Min's shoulder. He jolted and whipped around. No one there. But from behind the curtain covering the mirror, a human shape was slowly swelling outward, as if someone inside the thin fabric were pressing from the side of the mirror. The figure had no clear face, only the shape of narrow shoulders and a head bent to one side. It edged outward little by little while on the desk the pages of the book began turning faster. Rustle, 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 rustle. Min squeezed his eyes shut, lunged forward, and slammed the book onto the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. The shape inside the curtain bulged larger. The whole room trembled faintly. From the recorder came overlapping whispers loud enough to become piercing. Then Min suddenly remembered. The recorder. If this thing lived by telling, by story, by forcing others to hear and read, then perhaps it needed a receiver. It needed eyes, ears, attention. Min grabbed the recorder, placed it right beside the book, then staggered back, covering his ears and squeezing his eyes shut. He did not listen. He did not look. He let the machine coldly record everything in his place. The book began to shake violently. Wind rose inside the room. The whispering multiplied from one source into 100. There was crying, laughter, voices reciting names, someone pleading, "Don't leave me in the next page." Children calling for their mothers. The shape behind the curtain trembled violently and then seemed to be sucked backward into the mirror. A tremendous force stretched across the room. Min crouched on the floor clutching his head, pressing his ears so hard it hurt. Then everything went silent. When Min opened his eyes, the lights had come back on. The book lay still on the floor. The recorder lay there too, its battery light blinking red. Shaking, Min rewound the recording. At first there was only rustling. Then at the second minute, a man's voice began speaking, flat and heavy, as though reading a list. Names, dates, broken causes of death, accident, drowning, hanging, missing. Then the voice changed into Min's own, recounting his most private memories. The things he had never told anyone, the day his mother died. The crushing guilt because he had argued with her that very night. The nightmare that had lasted 3 years. Then finally, at the 7th minute, a very small voice emerged, sounding as if it came from the bottom of a deep well. The vessel is full. A new scribe is needed. A new scribe. Min suddenly understood why the book always had to be read at midnight. Midnight was the threshold between the old day and the new, between what had passed and what was about to come. It was not a book meant to be read, but a vessel meant to be continued. Every person who opened it had the darkest part of themselves drawn inside, becoming part of the contents, and at last becoming the next one to write on its behalf, dragging other names and other stories into it. A chain without end. No one ever truly finished reading it. They only became the next page. Min stared at the book for a long time. Then he did the only thing left. He carried it to the riverside on the outskirts of the city, where the old mansion of the manuscript copying man had once stood. According to the cleaning woman, it was close to dawn, and white mist drifted over the black water like an enormous funeral shroud. Along a desolate bank overgrown with grass, the ruined foundation of an old house still remained. Min dug with his hands and a folding shovel until he opened a patch of wet earth. Not far below the surface, he struck rotten wood, a cellar hatch. The stench that poured up when he pried it open made him turn aside and vomit. The cellar was small and dark, filled with scraps of paper and fragments of bone mixed together. On the stone walls, in hundreds of overlapping strokes, were names. Names of people, names of the dead, names repeated so many times they pressed over one another into a black mass. In the center of the cellar stood a rotting wooden table and an old manuscript stand. Upon it sat a dried-out ink bottle and a rusted metal pen. The book in Min's hands trembled faintly, as if recognizing the place where it had been born. He did not climb into the cellar. He only stood at the edge, looking down into the darkness, and hurled the book down. It struck the table and fell open. A gust of freezing air burst upward from the cellar like the last breath of a gigantic mouth. The rotting papers below all rustled at once, though there was no wind outside. On the surface of the river nearby, small circular ripples appeared, thick and countless, as if many fingers were tapping from beneath the water. Min poured the can of gasoline he had brought into the cellar. Its sharp smell overwhelmed even the stench of death. He struck a flame. This time the fire rose much more fiercely. Perhaps because this place was its true origin. The flames devoured the table, the scraps of paper, the writing on the walls, and the black book convulsing at the center of the blaze. From the cellar came a barrage of screams violent enough to make the ground itself seem to tremble. Not one person, but an entire multitude long trapped there, now all surging free at once. Min stepped back, eyes burning from smoke and from pure terror. Inside the column of fire he thought he saw faces appearing and vanishing: the librarian, the unnamed male student, the child in the school uniform, other faces without names, and finally a gaunt man holding a pen, hunched over the writing stand in the posture of someone who had died there long ago. Then the fire caved inward. The rotten cellar hatch collapsed, and the surrounding earth and grass slid down, gradually filling the hole. The sun began to rise. The screaming stopped. The wind on the river returned to normal. Min stood there for a very long time, until only a thin trail of smoke and the smell of damp ash remained. He thought it was finally over. But it was not. A few weeks later, Min returned reluctantly to something like normal life. He slept a little better. He no longer heard pages turning every night. The bruises on his wrist gradually faded. He told himself that he had buried it, that he had burned the root of the curse itself. Until one afternoon, while cleaning up his materials to finish his thesis, he opened a drawer and found a folded sheet of paper inside. He did not remember putting it there. Min unfolded it. It was a yellowed sheet, smoke-stained at the edges. In the center was a single line of fresh black writing, as though it had been written only seconds earlier. "Did you think burning the book would be enough?" The blood in Min's veins seemed to turn to ice. Beneath that first line, more letters began to appear. Slowly. Clearly. Unmistakably. When you opened the first page, you became the next part. His hand shook so hard the paper rustled loudly. The final line appeared, stretching all the way to the edge of the page. "And then someone else will find what you write." At that exact moment, his laptop chimed with the sound of a new email. Min turned toward it. There was a new message with no sender and no subject line. Attached to it was only a single file. Final_manuscript, docs. The screen opened the file by itself. On the first page, words were appearing across the white background. "Never read this book at midnight." In the corner of the screen, the computer clock switched to 0000 even though outside the window it was still late afternoon. And behind Min, in the locked room where he was completely alone, came the sound of the first footstep. Clack. Then another. Very slow. Very close. As though the story had never ended.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.